In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos scouting report for week 6 of the Argos season, and we've got a rematch with Hamilton this week, so I have brought back the CFL on TSN's Marshall Ferguson. Marshall, how are you doing, and thanks for joining me again.
It's good to be back. I want to say disclaimer for anybody watching on YouTube here on the X's and Argos scouting report that this is not a Calgary Stampeders logo, okay? On my shirt, I understand I'm going against league branding with a little Nike logo here, nothing new era. This is the Burlington Stampeders, okay? This is junior football that we're repping here today. So try to find something that was a little bit in between Toronto and Hamilton for the second conversation.
That's pretty good, and that'll work. And between that and my red, I'm sure people were wondering right off the bat, what am I watching here? But I think we're all good. So first of all, what did you think of the game? Like, what was your takeaway from that Labor Day game? It was kind of a weird one.
It was, and it was funny. I had a friend who was sitting in the stands, said it was a great environment, by the way. And I know that there were some things that happened in Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, and I know that there were Argos Sucks chants going out like always, but it seemed like the environment in Hamilton, people were really genuinely happy to have CFL football back in the stands, which is why my first takeaway is a bit of a weird one for a weird game, as you said. That first quarter, Ben, did it even happen? Like the first quarter of the game, I blinked and it was over. And I actually had the thought, man, I kind of feel bad for people that bought tickets to this game. Because I thought if you're sitting there in person, and I'm cheap because I'm Scottish, so I'm constantly evaluating everything down to pennies and whatnot, where I'm going, well, I paid this amount of money for this and it's worth this much. Or I watch Netflix, but I don't watch it quite as much as Crave. So maybe we should get rid of Crave. Maybe we should. And it's like, I'm constantly assessing the cost of things and the value you're getting. And I thought, you bought a ticket to that, looking at it and saying to yourself, the first quarter's gone and I feel like it never happened. And I always feel bad for people when that happens. Usually the karma of a CFL game, if a first quarter flies by, the fourth quarter drags. Like there's this push-pull relationship that you get where usually you end up getting to 150 snaps, both offenses run around 60 plays, the special teams run about 30. Like you get these splits. But my first takeaway was just, I can't believe how quick it felt. And that I'm not sure I was really anticipating, because for that to happen, I thought, well, it'd just be the Argos running all over the Ticats with their defensive line, and it would just be a short game with a lot of clock burning. And it was not the case. They both threw the football and it still flew by.
Yeah, at the end of the first half, I know like the first half was over in like an hour, and I remember thinking, and this is, I think maybe that the broadcaster in me was thinking, man, they better be getting some material ready because they may have an hour to kill before that 4:00 game. But it evened out, like you said, that second half. It's the pace slowed down a little bit. And just to comment on the thing that you were saying, it's funny because I was talking to a friend of mine who is a diehard Hamilton Tiger Cats fan, and I know I'm not sure how I am friends with a diehard Hamilton Tiger Cats fan, but that's that's the way it was. And he was saying, he was talking to people on the way into the stadium, and normally they talked about how much they hate the Argos, how evil the Argos are, everything else. And it wasn't like that for this game. They were just so happy to be watching CFL football that there wasn't that usual hatred and animosity that we normally feel. It was there sort of more in a joking way, but it wasn't. It's certainly aggressive, and I know there have been incidents around the league, and hopefully we can see more games like that Hamilton game where it's there in good fun. And I know we had a lot of Argos fans that follow us on Twitter and communicate with us on Twitter that said it was actually a really nice environment. They were sort of jokingly booed a little bit, but there was nothing aggressive. Yeah. So I'm really happy to hear stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think that there's an infinite amount of negatives that have come out of COVID-19. We all know that, and to the league and to people and personal lives and family members and work being affected. And I mean, hell, our radio station shut down. I mean, like I've been directly affected by COVID stuff that has affected the business of broadcasting, but trying to look on the bright side, trying to find the positives. And there are a lot of them, I think, that are starting to come out once we're kind of working our way back towards, I'm not even going to call it normalcy. I kind of hate when people do that because nothing's normal. It's never going to be normal again. But you're starting to see people appreciate the little things a little bit more. I wrote the article on CFL.ca about that, where I said, listen, Labor Day has got this magic about it, and you don't have to understand it, right? You don't have to care that, oh, it's Labor Day. And it's, yeah, whatever. These two teams play 3 more times this year between Toronto and Hamilton. That doesn't mean you can't love this day more than any other and continue to celebrate the game. And in terms of the general tenor of the crowd, again, I wasn't there, but your friend said it. My friend said it. I was kind of living vicariously through him. It was like the tailgate was friendlier than it's ever been before. And it's never really bad in Hamilton. Like, I think there's this whole like Steel Town, everybody's wearing black, scary, all these flags. And no, those are good people, man. Like, those are good fans that love football and are passionate about it. Yeah, they'll rib you once in a while because they want to have their fun. But the tailgate, from what my friend said, was people genuinely seemed so thrilled to be back in that setting, something that felt like before COVID hit. And even getting into the stands, like it took a long time from what I had heard from various people, and nobody really cared. Like, how many tweets did you see coming out, Ben, that said, I can't believe how long it's taking to get inside the stadium, and this is ridiculous, and proof of vaccination? That stuff might have been out there, but I didn't see any of it. And I just feel like in the stands, it felt like a bit of a celebration. Of course, it helped, the snowbirds are there, and it's incredible weather, and it's the kids are going back to school some places, we think. But you're getting this vibe of, there were a lot of reasons why people were happy to be there, but just like Labor Day, nobody could really put their finger on it. People were just happy to be sitting in stands in a stadium that they've missed for the last year and a half.
Yeah, it was, and I think like surreal is a word that I heard a lot. I think Carmelo said that on your show as well. I just felt there's something just like, is this happening? Am I actually sitting in a stadium at a football game? And it's I think that was there was this sort of euphoria at being able to do something that felt like the good old days before we were affected by COVID. And I think that
shackled.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was sort of overriding any hatred, any inconvenience, any feeling of waiting in lines, whatever else. It's just like, let's just be happy we're here and we're watching Canadian football. So I think that was all really good. All right, let's get to the game. So
yes.
Takeaways for, like, I know Argoland was in full panic mode on Twitter following the game. There are all these questions about what's wrong with the defensive line, how come we're and I didn't feel like that in the game. It didn't feel dire to me. I saw a few mistakes, but if you look at the yardage, it's pretty much the same. Hamilton and Toronto both had just about the same amount of yardage. They both scored 2 touchdowns offensively. There was the defensive pick six and the punt return touchdown. Sure, a lot of the Toronto yards came in what we might call garbage time, but I just didn't think it was that lopsided, even though the score clearly got out of hand at some points in the fourth quarter. Is that how you took the game in too, or did you see it differently?
I think that it was a typical case of Labor Day matchups and rematches and all this. Really, anytime Toronto and Hamilton play, where very rarely is it, well, one team was consistently better than the other, and that's why they won by a bunch of points. It usually comes down to a couple of backbreaking moments. And to me, that was the punt return from Frankie Williams, where it feels like the game is, it's a little bit of a Hamilton momentum side, but there's still lots of room to grow for Toronto in the game. And maybe they haven't found their footing, but all it's going to take is a drive or two to get them back and feel like they are threatening once again. And that once that punt return goes, you're just like, all right, well, I get, like, that's kind of, it took the air out of the balloon, I think, a little bit from Toronto. And, being able to see the way that Toronto tried to start off the game, I really think from the word go, they were a little bit demoralized, because Hamilton played with a lot more energy defensively than they have throughout the season. Even in the victory against Montreal, like Carriel Brooks flying around, Tunde Adeleke in on every play, Javon Santos Knox was in on a lot of stuff, Ted Laurent, Mason Bennett being able to get his first sack in the CFL up front. Like, it was just, there were a lot of things happening with that defensive group for Hamilton that I think took Toronto out of their game plan. The reason I say that is they came out and essentially it was start the game, run, penalty, run, and then you're getting stacked and stuffed every time you try to run, and they just went, okay, let's go to the air, interception. And as soon as you can't run in the first parts of the game and establish the tone that you did against Winnipeg in week number 3, then you start to go, okay, well, let's start to sling it around the ballpark. And to Nick Arbuckle's credit, like, something I wanted to hit on in this interview was, I think Argos fans should see this evolution that's happening with Nick Arbuckle and realize that there's actually a really bright future here. And that might not feel like that coming out of Labor Day, the way that the game felt and, he was ineffective. But where he's targeting, how he's pushing the ball a little bit more vertically, how he's learning to use different parts of the field with his targets. He's seeing more of the field, it feels like, than he did in Calgary, where it was a little bit narrow between the hashes, under 15 yards. Now he's throwing into windows. Now he's being able to manipulate people with his eyes a little bit more from what I'm seeing. And I think that gives a bright future. So yeah, there were some big plays that kind of broke the back, but I didn't view this as an overwhelming win for Hamilton. And it's not that they didn't put it up on the scoreboard and get to sing and dance and hoot and holler and everything for the entire fourth quarter, essentially, because they did. But it's the process. It's how they got there. It was 4 or 5 big plays, like you say, Simone getting into the end zone, Frankie Williams getting into the end zone, having Tim White break your backside going into the end zone as well. Like those 3 plays, again, I'm not saying, you take away the 3 biggest plays, the game's all even. Well, obviously, great analysis, Marshall. But what I am saying is Toronto, if they clean up some of that stuff, it's a much closer game, I think. And Arbuckle was not nearly as bad as I've seen people assess him as being. I think anytime a backup quarterback goes in because the score's a little out of hand in the fourth quarter, we just assume, well, he had an awful day. I don't think he was that bad, man. There were things that happened around him, receivers falling down at inopportune moments. I think there was a couple of drops here and there. The protection wasn't great at times. They ended up having Philip Blake get dinged. You got to move the Castro into side. I mean, they were kind of all over the place and piecing it together on offense. And if they can actually establish the run a little bit, if they can actually get some more accuracy down the field on those throws that they're actually taking now, I think that you will see this game be much, much closer in the rematch.
I couldn't believe how people were jumping on Arbuckle. Like there were questions even at the press conference today, with like who's going to start at quarterback this week. To me, that was never even like I was floored at that, because to me, like Arbuckle at the end of the first half was 11 for 15, and he had a pick, but it's because Eric Rogers fell down on the route, and that was where the interception happened. He had a good first half. Now, his second half wasn't great, but they were down several touchdowns, so they had to press, and they had to go to things that he's not as comfortable doing. Arbuckle, it has, like everybody, has a skill set, and they had to kind of push a little bit, and it wasn't necessarily playing into his strengths. But I also want to give credit to Hamilton's play calling. I thought the play calling was... I'm sure there was a little bit of luck sometimes too, where you have the perfect play called at the perfect time. But right. I'm sure a lot of it is film study and just being familiar with what they were going to see. And there were some beautiful calls. That Simone Lawrence interception return, I don't know, do we call it that when it's 2 yards? But that return touchdown, that was an amazing play call for the situation. Just kind of going through what Arbuckle was seeing on that play. So they ended up, Adeleke is rushing the passer. Lawrence is coming. They both end up coming around the side. John White's got to pick both of them up. And then there's a sight adjustment that Daniels has got. He's got to, sort of take a quick slant into that space that's been vacated by Simone Lawrence blitzing. But when Arbuckle goes to throw it there, who's there but Mason Bennett has actually dropped into that spot, anticipating that's exactly where that hot or that sight adjustment's going to be. And so that's why you end up with the double clutch, because he's like, Mason Bennett, what? and then he eventually tries to throw it away, and it gets tipped. And that was it. But it seemed like every time the Argos had something, it was the perfect play call, whether it was just a simple cover 3 or what have you. The place that Arbuckle was looking to go, it just wasn't there. So
know what it honestly reminded me of, just in terms of like feeling your opponent always has the perfect call on, or is making the perfect adjustment in order to counter what you're doing. When I was going into university, I was on a recruiting trip to Laurier. There was a running back there named Mike Montoya at the time, and he worked at Vault, which is a big bar in Kitchener-Waterloo. And he said to me when he came home from working at the bar that night, he had $300 in his pocket from all the tips and all the people that were paying him to get in past the door and stuff, I'm sure. And he said, I'll play in a game of Madden. I was like, all right, sure. He goes, 300 to 1 odds that I'll beat you, or 30 to 1 odds, I should say, I'll beat you. So he lays down $300 in cash on the table. And I'm there from high school. I'm like, that's a year's worth of money to a high school kid, right? So I'm like, sure, here's $10. I laid it down on the table. He played as Deuce McAllister and Reggie Bush with the New Orleans Saints. And because he was a running back, all he did was run on me. Like, and I would sit back up like cover one, cover three. And then after about 15 plays, when you're playing a video game, you just get fed up, because you're like, why is this guy playing the video game like it's an actual football game and just grinding away on the yardage 4 yards at a time on me? I'm like, I'm engage 8. I'm going to blitz everybody. I probably blitzed him 3 times the entire time we played that Madden game. Each of those 3 times he went play action. It was the only time he went play action, and he threw touchdowns over my head. He beat me like 50-0, Ben, and he took my $10. So that's kind of what this game felt like to me, was there's always an opportunity for you to make plays, and Toronto was close, but Hamilton just had the right call on. Like whether they fell face first into it, whether it was the pregame scouting, whether it was adjustments in game, they had an answer to pretty much everything that Toronto threw at them in this game. And before we actually move on, I'm going to, for people that are watching on YouTube, actually, you would have to allow me to share my screen here for a second, because I do want to show people just when I'm talking about Arbuckle, and those of you that are listening, will just explain it to you kind of what we're looking at. But when you end up seeing the way that Nick Arbuckle approached this game compared to some of his other games, I think it will open Argos fans to the fact that he is evolving and he is getting an opportunity now to show what he's really about. And I think this is an intriguing kind of evolution of him throughout the season this year. So if you're watching on YouTube again, it's Arbuckle over on the side here. I'll just single it out so you can see it. And yeah, there's your Redding completions to deep shot down the sideline. And yeah, there's the interception that was thrown over on the left sideline that was intended for Eric Rogers that Carrier Brooks picked off. And yeah, there's the Simone interception. But to see this kind of like pyramid shape where you're challenging down the middle of the field, to put it in context, Hamilton went the first 3 games of the season without completing a pass in between the hashes beyond 6 yards down the field. Like, that's an essential part of the field if you're going to end up winning football games, is taking those shots and being able to complete them. And he did. He had a touchdown in the middle of the end zone there that went to Eric Rogers that we know, ugly, albeit, where he had to settle down in between all sorts of mess and jump ball and all that. And he had a deep completion down the middle of the field. So, like, to me, you see that and you think, okay, that's an evolution, because for people that don't know, Nick Arbuckle's target chart used to be everything under 10 yards. And it used to all be squeezed in between the hash marks, or maybe just outside the hash marks, because there was a lot of little slip screen throws and bubble screens. And like, he's actually pushing the edges of the field a little bit more now. And he's also working the intermediate throws, I think, at a higher level. And just to throw it in here, because I do have the screen up, I'll show you Dane Evans. Dude's a gunslinger. The targets that are beyond 20, 25 yards down the field, 3 of 7, right? But one of them goes for the big touchdown to Tim White. And then other than that, he's working these clusters in the screen game, in the quick game, throwing lots of curls. He's throwing lots of little crossing routes into the short side of the field when he's on the right hash. So there's a lot of things there that I think are of interest for people in terms of seeing, okay, what is there that's hopeful about this going forward? And to me, I just circle his evolution, because he couldn't go to Toronto and stay the same player he was in Calgary, and he's not. Dinwiddie is evolving with Arbuckle, and I think that's going to continue throughout the year. So just have some patience with that, because I really do see it happening in front of us.
So this week, there's not going to be a ton of time for adjustments. That's, with only really, a couple of days practice. And like today, the Argos basically just had a walkthrough, and it's a similar plan for tomorrow. It's a lot of mental installation, I think, that's going to be happening. I think there's going to be a lot of guys banged up. I imagine that guys were getting treatment probably all week this week. It's going to be like that for both teams. It was a really physical game, and you double that because it's the short week. Any concerns from Hamilton's side? Like, do you think there's anyone that you're not sure? Are we going to see them out there? What are you thinking in that regard?
I think they got out of it fairly clean for the most part. Like, it could have been a lot worse. I mean, obviously, Speedy getting blown up by Tristan Deku over the middle was a little scary, right? Because thankfully it looked like it was the win. It looked like it could have been rib. It looked like it could have been whatever was ailing Speedy in his midsection the first couple of weeks of the season, but didn't really seem to have much of that afterwards. It didn't seem to bother him too much. On the offensive line, I mean, I think there's a couple of guys that are dinged, but hey, what else is new, right? An offensive line, you're always going to have a little bit of something going on. So, I mean, they're patching it together in a variety of places right now, but coming out of that game, I don't see anything glaring where we're going to get to the rematch on Friday night. You're going to say, this guy is out and nobody saw it coming, kind of thing, or he's a scratch and nobody saw it coming. I think the roster is going to be probably 95% the same, which honestly, when you're coming into a game on 4 days rest, that's a massive blessing and advantage, because if you can do that, you can have whatever amount of continuity and understanding of the team you're playing against carry over, and it's so much smoother once you get into the game and you look at the guy next to you and hey man, we were here 5 days ago and we were playing against the same team, and now we're back on the football field and we feel like we know what we're looking at. But I think they'll be okay in terms of the injury side.
I'm a little more concerned about Toronto. Philip Blake, his status, I'm a little worried about. He's had such bad luck this year. It just seems like every game it's something different. It's not like it's the same, oh, it's the back again, or it's the shoulder, or every game is something new and there's only so many injuries you can take. It's such a physical position. So I'm a little worried about him. I'm not sure about Cresden Butler. And that's a pretty big loss too. That secondary has seen so many players like Deku, who's playing great, Jamal Peters, who's playing great. Those guys weren't even supposed to be on the field, and so you had injuries to Cahoon, you had injury to Robertson Daniel, and now Cresden Butler out. That secondary's played great, but again, it's just one of those things like how many pieces can we lose before there starts to it starts to show up a little bit. And with Philip Blake, I think that's a concern, and with the secondary, that is a concern as well. But hopefully, it's mostly just guys dealing with pain, because that's just part of playing football and part of recovery, but not something that they can't overcome. Now, were you at Mac Marshall? Were you an ice tub guy or a hot tub guy?
Yes. No, I'm still an ice tub guy to this day. I love it. I think it's one of the best things that you can do for your body. I got addicted to it when I was actually training in high school. A place that I was working out at was called Fine Line Performance in Kingston, Ontario. And they set me up, me and my buddy. It was basically, there was a physio clinic that was above the gym that we worked out at, and they had contrast baths. So it was hot tub and cold tub right side by side. And we'd spend 5 minutes in one, 5 minutes in the other, 5 minutes in one, 5 minutes in the other. And we just jump back and forth. And because we were idiots, we thought it was this fun game of, who can go up to their neck in the ice tub and, oh, wow, I feel my heart rate dropping. It's like, yeah, maybe that's a bad idea. But yeah, I love the benefits of it. And I think now it's the fact that I'm getting older, I'm aging a little bit. And so when I run, my calf feels like it's going to explode half the time when I go for a run in my right leg. And I still dive in there. I got the massage guns, and I got the rollers, and I got all that stuff, man. I act like I should be playing still because of my recovery, but the actual on-field stuff is well gone.
The ice is always the way to go, but I always feel like there was a huge divide in the locker room between guys that swear by ice and guys that just won't go anywhere near the ice tub.
Oh yeah. Some people absolutely despise it, but for me, I don't know, maybe it's like the Scottish Swedish background that's in me, where I always love seeing people, like even Olympic athletes that are training from Scandinavia, where at home they'll just dive into a lake. Like I love that primal sense of like, this is what's right for my body. It's right in front of me. Cold water is good. It reduces inflammation. It makes me feel great when I get feeling back in my legs after being in 55-degree water. So yeah, I'm a fan of it. I'm sure that there will have been a lot of ice used up in both of the training rooms this week.
And you feel brand new. It's the best thing. Like, yes, there's a couple painful minutes, but when you get out, you just feel like, hey, I'm new again. I'm ready to go. Yeah. So into the game now. So this week's game, it's at BMO now, so it's a little bit different. We got a change of surface for one, a change of environment, and that does matter. There's a pretty big difference between playing in Hamilton and playing in Toronto. So how are you thinking this game is going to go? Again, short turnaround. We don't know how much new stuff we're going to see. Probably not a ton. There'll be little wrinkles here and there. How do you feel like this game's going to go?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I have my eye on that I'm kind of noticing as a trend for Hamilton to the personnel packages that are being used by teams. And something that's jumping out to me with Hamilton that I'm interested to see how Toronto adjusts to it, or if they decide to do something a little bit different this time around, is when Nikola Kalinic is taking a lot of snaps in the game, how do they match that? Because they're not just using him to chip defensive ends. He's actually getting involved in the offense a little. So, he had a touchdown in the game against Montreal, I believe, and he's getting a couple of targets here and there. They're trying to run the ball. I think Sean Thomas Arlington is still such more an effective back than Don Jackson is at this point. And Kalinic seems to be able to block for Thomas Arlington a little bit better too, because he understands where he wants to go. There's just this natural vibe between those two guys. But the reason that I bring him up is Hamilton still doesn't even have Jake Burt, their first overall pick, who's a big body hybrid guy, smaller than Kalinic, but not by much, and can run. And they're leading the league right now using 4 receivers, 1 fullback, 1 running back as their formation. Ben, they're in that formation. And again, without context, I understand this doesn't seem like much, but they are in 4 receivers, 1 fullback, 1 running back, 43% of their snaps thus far this year. to have a fullback on the field for almost half your snaps in a season is kind of crazy in the CFL. You haven't seen that probably since Calvin McCarty with Edmonton with Ricky Ray. I mean, it's been a while since you've had a fullback that's consistently that much on. Now, Rob Cote in Calgary, sure, but to put it in perspective, like Toronto is on the field in that percentage of snaps like 10% of the time. Well, Hamilton's leading the league at 43%. That's 21% above the league average. So if they're going to be that heavy with that formation, if they're going to use that personnel this much, how are teams going to adjust, especially in a short turnaround where you're watching the film and realizing, okay, when they're in this personnel, when they line up in this formation with the personnel, here's what they like to run. And I think that's going to be the kind of interesting chess match in this is when Hamilton puts Klinich in the game and it's 2nd and 3, how much does Toronto key off of him and run blitz and try and shut things down? And how willing is Hamilton to take the risky 2nd and 3 play action touchdown shot where Klinich crosses the formation, you go to Sean Thomas Erlington, you take a deep drop, and off your back foot, Dane Evans is throwing a skinny post to Brandon Banks. Like that, to me, there's going to be a moment in this rematch where that's going to be a conversation of should they have taken the shot, or did they take the shot, or how heavy did Toronto lean in when they saw Klinich in that cross ball motion that they like to run with him. So, that to me, I have that as kind of an interesting point. In terms of the way the game plays out, I think it's going to be very similar. It'll be a couple of big plays. I think Toronto would like to be able to run the ball a little bit more, control some more of the clock. But Arbuckle is going to be a high percentage thrower, and Dane Evans showed that he can go on the road in Montreal in week 3 and have success. So I expect nothing less for him. It might have been week 4, actually, but I expect nothing less for him going into Toronto. I think he'll enjoy that environment, and Toronto's got their work cut out for them, but I think they're up to it.
So I'm waiting to see, because I thought we might see this last week. When Coach Dinwiddie was in Calgary, that offense did such a good job of setting up the opposition for failure week to week. They basically use their own film study against them is something I keep, I like to say, where you'd see something again and again and you say, well, this is a tendency we can key on. And then, of course, they know this, and you get that same look, that same action, and then suddenly the ball's going the other way, or it's play action out of it, or whatever. And there's so many things that I've been jotting down in my notes in each game that Toronto plays. And we're like, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll be seeing this soon. And yet we haven't. And at some point, they're going to come out. And I feel like there were a bunch in that Hamilton game where they were setting up some of these tendencies. And now Hamilton, in this quick week, they're going through film study. Maybe now is the time to take advantage. And you notice there was a lot of short stuff. There was, you saw on your chart, yes, it did expand out, but there's a lot of stuff down low. I know Coach Dinwiddie's a fan of double moves, and we may see some of that this week. So I'm looking for a few of those big plays where it looks like one thing, it's something else. They've thrown that jailbreak screen 1 billion times. I'm waiting for something out of that. We started calling it the Ricky Collins Jr. screen, but then of course they had, I think Gittins Jr. was running it last week. But,
yeah. I'm actually interested to see them run that at some point. To your point here about double moves and taking a shot and trying to open up the game. Like obviously they hit on one of those double moves with DeVaris Daniels in the game at home, the home opener, right, against Winnipeg that you and I were both at. But when they run that, lining up in the pistol, take the snap, show run to the field, and then Arbuckle has this great ability to flip his hips back into the boundary and throw that slant. And that's also when DeVaris Daniels got killed by Brandon Alexander coming down to start the second half in that week 3 game. But like I'm waiting for them at some point to either, show that over to the field, flip it back and have a sluggo, or to have, a little stutter and go, or whatever it's going to be, because there's no way, Ben, this is somebody who loves X's and O's and loves football. There's no way that they've designed that the entire year with the idea of, well, we're only ever going to throw the slant. Like that's it. That's the whole, no, they've built extensions off of that. Like you're saying though, they just haven't used them yet. So maybe this is the week because they got to find a way to get a win here.
Yeah, and playing Hamilton 4 times, you don't want to spill all your candies in the lobby in game 1. So I do think we're going to see some of that this week. But again, you can't empty the entire bag. But it's a pretty important win for the Toronto coming up this week, I think, because they travel to Saskatchewan next, and you just don't want to end up in a situation where suddenly you're down with Ottawa near the bottom, looking up at everyone else, especially knowing that Montreal is getting away with a little bit of an easier schedule. And so, they're going to put up numbers by the end in terms of wins.
I had no idea how often they played Ottawa. Derek Taylor told me that the other day, and I was like, how is that a thing? I understand that you can't look at a team and project how good they're going to be and then change the schedule based off that. But I'm like, that is a serious competitive advantage. Like in a league where I think there's 8 really solid competitive teams right now and one that's going to struggle consistently. If you're playing the team that is struggling consistently more than everybody else, it's going to help your record. Like that might end up pushing Montreal towards the 2 seed in the East at this point, and then either a Hamilton or a Toronto down into the 3 and having to play, on the road both times through or something like that. So it is crazy the way that this is kind of shaking out as we're about a third of the way through the season.
Yeah, it's weird, but it just makes those Toronto Montreal and Hamilton Montreal games that much more exciting and more important. So
yeah,
we'll I guess that's the bright side of the way to look at it from an Argos or Ticats point of view. So for predictions this week, I'm sticking with Argos win. I feel like one of these days I'll hit on one of my predictions. I'm actually thinking this is going to be a really tight, down to the wire 23-22 is where I'm going with this one. I don't know if it's a last second field goal hit or miss, but I'm feeling a 23-22 Argos victory. Where are you going this week, Marshall?
I'm torn because I feel like Dane Evans played at such a high level, really in the third quarter specifically for Hamilton, that if he can carry that over, I don't think it'll matter that it's on the road or anything else. I think I feel like Toronto has it in them to battle back in, to be fueled by playing at home, to enjoy playing on the grass. They look like a different team, Ben, in week 3 against Winnipeg. Like when you saw them play in the first time they had a back-to-back, Winnipeg week 2, they just get bludgeoned. Week 3, they come home, look like completely different. Well, it wasn't necessarily a bludgeoning, but it certainly felt similar to that game in Winnipeg in week 2, what they just did in week 5. So can they come home in week 6 and redo the script from what they felt? But I mean, I feel like they have the potential to. I think Arbuckle gets back on track. I think they hit a couple of those double moves and they score some points. But I do think that Dane Evans is showing right now through Montreal, Labor Day against Toronto, and then into this game, that he is the starting quarterback of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I don't think he's giving it back anytime soon. And I do believe that Hamilton will find a way to get the win in this game. And it just feels like they're getting onto a roll now where they're not necessarily the team we thought they were going to be. They look different. Speedy's not the focal point. Braylon Addison's not making all the plays. Don Jackson isn't the primary ball carrier. But they're finding a way, and Tommy Condell's massaging the offense with, who the hell's Tim White? Okay, now we got Sean Thomas Erlington being the lead back again. Okay, well, the tackles, who's that Jordan Murray guy? And K. Okafor still in the game. It's like they're kind of figuring it out on the fly, but they're starting to get the wheels turning. They're starting to build some momentum. So in terms of a score line on this one, I think if Hamilton's going to win, I think they have to score in the high 20s, low 30s minimum, because I do think Toronto's going to put up 20, 25 points. I think they'll score more than they did in that Labor Day game. So I'll say something like, 35-26 or something like that, because I think that Toronto will score, but Hamilton will find a way.
All right. Well, one of us, this is new for us, Marshall. One of us is going to be right this week, so that's an exciting thing to look forward to. We'll have to see who it is. Marshall, thanks again for joining us today. You've been awesome with your time. We said we would go short today, and we've ended up, again, putting together an entire morning show. But I always appreciate having you on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Ben. And it never feels long when we're talking about football. So I think that's why we end up going long. But I appreciate it. And I hope that everybody has a great time. If you're going down to the game Friday night at BMO, enjoy yourselves, be loud, whether you're a Hamilton fan, Toronto fan, whatever. It was an electric environment in week 3 when Ben and I were both there. And I look forward to seeing the rivalry, hopefully long-term, between Arbuckle and Evans continue to develop. The first chapter was fun. We get a second. Later this year, we get a third. Then we get a fourth. We're probably going to get a fifth in the playoffs. I mean, these two teams you're going to know them real well by the time that we hit November, December. But this is just another one to enjoy. And hey, it's supposed to be beautiful weather as well, so that can't hurt.
That'll just about do it for us on the X's and Argos Scouting Report. For Marshall Ferguson, my name is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.